Have you ever gotten so mad that you want to set something on fire? Well, imagine your favorite team losing a Game 7 in the finals, and your response is to start a riot. Twice. This is the 1994 and 2011 Vancouver Riots. Play the intro. Before 1994, the Vancouver Canucks made the Stanley Cup Final once in 1982, but were swept by the New York Islanders. After that, the Canucks had flipped between first or second round exits and seasons without playoffs. In the last few years, Vancouver lost in the second round once and the first round twice. The Canucks weren't expected to do much in the 93-94 season. They finished as a 7th seed with a mediocre 41-40 record. It looked like another early bow out. Despite winning the first game in Calgary, the Canucks lost the next three to fall behind 3-1 against the second seed Flames. It seemed like the Canucks would roll over yet again. Yet a miracle happened. Vancouver pulled out not one, not two, but three straight overtime wins, including a double overtime winner by Pavel Bure to extinguish Calgary and pull off a huge upset. In the next round, the Canucks faced the Dallas Stars. Dallas had just swept the St. Louis Blues and were expected to do the same against Vancouver. The Canucks thought otherwise. The Canucks won both games in Dallas to lead 2-0. The Stars took Game 3 in Vancouver, but the Canucks would take the last two on home ice to smash the Stars and make the conference finals, for the first time since 1982. Vancouver's opponent in the third round, Toronto. The Toronto Maple Leafs were no pushovers. Last year, Toronto made the conference finals, but were undone by a missed high stick, Kerry Fraser, Wayne Gretzky, and a victim complex. The Leafs had ended the ambitions of the Chicago Blackhawks and San Jose Sharks and were on the cusp of returning to the finals for the first time in 27 years. Fun fact, this was the last time the conference finals had been played entirely in Canada. It felt like the run was over for the Canucks after the Maple Leafs took Game 1 in overtime. Past Canucks teams would have run out of gas. Not these Canucks. With the combination of outstanding performances in net by goalie Kirk McLean, blistering speed the Maple Leafs couldn't contain, and a double overtime winner by Greg Adams, the Canucks, against all odds, were going to the Stanley Cup Finals. The first time since that great run in 1982. While the Canucks were looking to capture their first cup in franchise history, their opponent was looking to break a drought that started before the United States entered World War II. The New York Rangers, one of the original 6 teams in the NHL. Despite this, at the time, the Rangers and the Blackhawks were tied for the least amount of cups for the original 6 teams with 3. New York was looking to win a Stanley Cup for the first time since 1940. The last time the Rangers won a cup, FDR was in his second term. This series wasn't expected to be even. The Rangers finished 52-24 with 112 points. The Canucks finished with 85 points. It was the largest point differential in a finals matchup since, ironically, 1982. Game 1 from Madison Square Garden in Manhattan. The Rangers led the majority of the game. They were 1 minute away from a win when Martin Gelinas tied the game. In overtime, New York swarmed McLean, but he stood tall. After Brian Leetch hit the crossbar, Greg Adams, the same hero from Game 5 against Toronto, scored the game winner, giving Vancouver a 1-0 series lead. In Game 2, after being punched in the mouth, the Rangers struck back with a close 3-1 win to even the series. Game 3, now the series shifted to Vancouver. Despite the Canucks netting one early, the Rangers cruised for 5 straight goals to take a 2-1 series lead. In Game 4, the Canucks jumped to an early 2-0 lead, but just like Game 3, the Rangers came back. New York doubled Vancouver's amount to win 4-2 and take a 3-1 series lead. The Rangers were 1 win away from the Stanley Cup. Back to New York. The Cup was in the building. The parade route was planned. Everyone thought this series was over. The Canucks were leading 3-0 at one point, yet the Rangers came back to tie the game. Unlike the last 2 games in Vancouver, the Canucks slammed their foot on the gas with 3 straight unanswered goals to force a Game 6 in British Columbia. New York leads the series 3-2, still one win away from the Cup. Game 6 in Vancouver. With their back to the wall once again, the Cardiac Canucks were one step ahead of the Rangers all game. With the 4-1 win in Game 6, the Canucks, just like in the first round against the Flames, had forced a Game 7 after being down 3-1. Game 7. One win away from their first Cup in history, or one win away from avenging 50 years of pain and avoiding humiliation. The hometown Rangers led 2-0 early thanks to goals by Brian Leetch and Adam Graves. Canucks captain Trevor Linden sliced the lead to 2-1, but Rangers captain Mark Messier increased New York's lead to 3-1. Linden got his second to cut the lead to 1 once again. With 5 minutes left in everything, Nathan Lafayette hit the post. The clock had struck midnight on the Canucks' Cinderella run. The Rangers had won the Stanley Cup for the first time since 1940. But while New York won the Cup on the ice, Vancouver made headlines off the ice. Following the end of Game 7, an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 people stormed towards Robson and Thurlow Street. Stores were smashed and raided, street signs were ripped, and not much was done to stop it. Police had fired tear gas, but it only caused rioters to scatter all over the place. The riot continued deep into the next morning. Around $1.1 million Canadian in damage, and over 200 were injured. Fortunately, no one lost their life that night. An estimated total of more than 100 people were charged following the riot. Not only did Vancouver turn ugly, the Canucks would decline sharply. Following the riot, the Canucks would fall into mediocrity and awfulness. They would win a series in '95, but would either be bounced by inferior competition or would miss the playoffs entirely. And the icing on the cake, 1997. Mark Messier and Mike Keenan haunting the dreams of every Canucks fan. The Canucks wouldn't win a round until 2003. Around the mid to late 2000s, the Canucks were on the rise. They had a solid core, yet they could never get over the hump. It didn't matter if it was the Flames burning them in an overtime Game 7. It didn't matter if it was being crushed by the Ducks. It didn't matter if it was being traumatized by the horrors of Chelsea Dagger and the Blackhawks. The Canucks could never get over the hump. In 2011, the Canucks won the President's Trophy with the best record in the league. In the first round, the Canucks had to face the defending champion, also hangover-induced Blackhawks. This was the same team that eliminated the Canucks in the second round the last 2 seasons. Vancouver flexed their might by taking a commanding 3-0 lead over Chicago. But the Hawks weren't dead yet. Not 1, not 2, but 3 straight wins, forcing the series to a 7th game. The game reached overtime where Alex Burrows slayed the Dragon. The Canucks had finally beaten the Blackhawks in a series and were going to the second round. In the next round, the Canucks faced the Nashville Predators. The Predators were a somewhat newer franchise. This was their first second-round appearance after upsetting the Ducks. Both teams split the first 2 in Vancouver. In Nashville, the Canucks took control, taking games 3 and 4 to lead 3-1. The Preds would force a Game 6 after edging the Canucks in Game 5. Back in Nashville for Game 6, Mason Raymond and Daniel Sedin scored 2 goals in 2 minutes to put Vancouver in front. Nashville would get 1 to cut the lead in half. When it looked like the Predators would tie it, Roberto Luongo was there to keep the door shut and send the Canucks to the third round, for the first time since 1994. In the conference finals, the Canucks matched up with the San Jose Sharks, another team looking to win their first cup. The Sharks had chomped through the Los Angeles Kings and Detroit Red Wings and were looking to make the Stanley Cup final for the first time in franchise history. The Canucks had other plans. Vancouver took both games on home ice. Both teams split the next 2 at HP Pavilion in San Jose. In Game 5, the Sharks, with their season on the line, had a 2-1 lead in the third period, until Ryan Kesler tied the game with 13 seconds left, forcing overtime. In double overtime, the puck took a weird bounce that nobody saw. Nobody except Kevin Bieksa, who launched a slap shot that was able to reach the net. The Vancouver Canucks were going to the Stanley Cup final for the first time since 1994. In the finals, the Canucks were up against the Boston Bruins. Just like the Rangers, the Bruins were trying to end a drought. The Bruins hadn't won a cup since 1972. In Game 1, both goalies were dominant. Vancouver's Roberto Luongo and Boston's Tim Thomas kept the score sheet blank for most of the game. I said most of the game. With 18 seconds left, Raffi Torres decided the game as the Canucks took Game 1 and led the series 1-0. In Game 2, both teams had separate one-goal leads but couldn't capitalize. Unlike Game 2, there was no third period magic. Overtime was needed. It took Alex Burrows, the same hero from the first round against Chicago, 11 seconds to give Vancouver a 3-2 lead and a 2-0 series lead. Game 3, the series shifted to Boston. The Bruins, needing a win to have a pulse in the series, unleashed hell onto Luongo. 4 goals in the second and 4 in the third to rout the Canucks and cut the series lead to 2-1. In Game 4, Tim Thomas shut down the Vancouver offense as Boston rolled past them with a 4-0 win, evening the series. In Game 5, the series went back to BC. It was another clash of titans between Luongo and Thomas. Luongo was perfect. Thomas almost was also, except one went in. Maxime Lapierre gave the Canucks the lead in the third period. Luongo kept Boston scoreless and Vancouver took a 3-2 series lead. This time, the Canucks had the edge. One win would give the Canucks their first Stanley Cup. The same virus that neutralized the Canucks in Games 3 and 4 came back to roost. The Bruins, facing adversity, came out firing with 4 straight goals. Vancouver tried but couldn't keep up with Boston. This series needed 7 games. Game 7 from Vancouver. Before Game 7 starts, put this stat in mind. In Games 1, 2, and 5, the Canucks have outscored the Bruins 5-2. But in Games 3, 4, and 6, the Bruins have outscored the Canucks 17-3. What's the deciding factor? The home team has outscored the away team and won every game in this series. So does that mean a Canucks win? Patrice Bergeron would put Boston in front 1-0 in the first. Vancouver had many chances but couldn't get anything past Tim Thomas. In the second, Brad Marchand would double the lead. Then Bergeron would get a second, making it 3-0 Bruins. The Canucks kept firing at Thomas, but nothing went in. Marchand would get an empty net goal to put the nail in the coffin. In Game 7, the Bruins had scored more goals than the last 3 games in Vancouver this series. With a 4-0 shutout by Tim Thomas, the Boston Bruins were Stanley Cup champions. Just like '94, headlines were being made outside Rogers Arena. Immediately after everyone knew the Bruins would be hoisting Lord Stanley in front of a sour Vancouver crowd, Canucks fans erupted. Similar to '94, there were watch parties in downtown Vancouver. There was some police presence to check for alcohol, but when nearly 100,000 people were crammed into one area, some were able to slip through the cracks. Cars were flipped over and were set on fire. Canucks fans went insane. Most, if not all of them, had too much alcohol. The chaos continued, featuring smashing windows, looting stores, and starting more fires. Some Good Samaritans tried to put a stop to it, but were beaten in the process. The riots started to disperse around midnight when police started making arrests. 101 people were arrested and eventually 301 people were charged, but the damage was done. It was worse than 1994. Around 17 cars were destroyed in the riot. Around $9 million in damage, once again Canadian dollars. 140 people were injured in the riot, but fortunately nobody lost their life that night. Vancouver had a black eye, overshadowing a great season by their hockey team. While Vancouver fans erupted in '94 and 2011, it is worth mentioning that not all Canucks fans are like this. Canucks fans have had to carry this reputation to this day when they aren't all like this. Since 2011, the Canucks have won a series only once in the bubble in 2020. Today, Canucks fans can only dream of such runs. The Canucks today are a team in disarray, having 3 coaches in the last 2 seasons, a management team that has no idea what to do, and an owner with more skeletons in his closet. It might be a long time before the Canucks make it back to the finals. If they do make it in the near future, hopefully Vancouver doesn't riot again. One more thing. Bring back Holiday. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I'll see you in the next video.